I work the overnight shift at a gas station. What showed up during the storm still haunts me. I work overnights as a gas station clerk in our small town. Our station is located off the highway that leads out of town, and so usually most of the cars and trucks that come by are on long drives across the state. This makes most night shifts that I work to be unpredictable. Sometimes there would be a lot of cars and trucks coming through, but other times it would be mostly empty. This night was definitely on the slower side, but still had some cars stopping by every once in a while. Thankfully, to keep me busy, my boss had left me a bunch of tasks to get done during my shift. I had to reset one of the shelves, which meant taking everything off and repositioning the racks, then placing everything back. It's not hard or complicated, but just time consuming an hour into the night. I heard some thunder in the distance. In checking the forecast, it said it was going to start storming soon. So I paused what I was doing and quickly went outside to take care of the trash bins, so I wouldn't have to do it later while it was raining. While I was out there, I saw a car's headlights in the dark about a quarter mile down the road. They were parked, but there was nothing out there other than large, empty fields. It could have been nothing, or a flat tire possibly, but I went on with my work and got back inside. Not too long after, it started pouring outside. I continued on working on the shelves, but as the storm got worse, I had to actually lock the entrance doors because the wind kept swinging them open. Nobody had come into the store all night anyway, and now, with the storm, there were barely any cars out either. While I locked up, though, I saw that the headlights were still out by the field and hadn't moved. This kept my mind occupied for the next little while as I worked. But then, through the rain, I heard the door shake louder than usual. I turned around, seeing a guy with his face right up to the door and staring right at me. He looked probably in his early 40s, wearing a hood over his head and having a very tired look. I unlocked the door and opened it for him, making a comment about the bad weather, but he ignored me. The guy just stood there and looked at me as water dripped from his face. Then he walked past me and started walking through the aisles like a normal shopper. Really confused by the way he was acting, I just went around the counter and waited for him to be done shopping. He walked around for a few minutes, glancing over at me a couple times before walking out the door. I don't think he stole anything either. He just walked around and then left. Considering the weather, that was really unusual and had me almost creeped out in a way, wondering why he even bothered coming inside. I looked out the window and saw the man walking past the gas pumps and out to the road. Then he stopped on the corner and waited. A moment later, the headlights down the road started moving, coming toward the gas station and stopping right next to the guy. While I watched, the front doors started swinging open again, reminding me to go over and lock them. I then watched from the door as the guy started walking back toward the gas station and the car followed, driving into the parking lot. They parked by the front and another man got out of the car. And then both of them came walking up to the door. The first man pushed on it as if expecting it to have still been unlocked, but instantly got angry when it didn't open. I was only a couple feet from the door, but he still banged aggressively on it while looking right at me. This was far beyond what any normal customer would do. So at this point, I knew there was more to this. I ran to the desk and triggered the alarm to notify the police station, then just watched as they both tried kicking the door down for a minute before getting in the car and speeding away. Afterward, in those minutes before police showed up, it was just so unreal how everything felt with only the sound of the storm outside. There was no doubt what was about to have happened. But it doesn't make it any less terrifying. If it wasn't storming that night, and the wind wasn't blowing the doors open, I probably never would have even locked them, meaning they could have just walked in, and there would have been nothing I could do. Maybe it would have been just a regular robbery, but there's no denying that it probably would have been easiest for them to just take me down and then rob the place. Unfortunately, they were never caught. So I still find myself getting nervous on every overnight shift. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, I live in a small 4-story apartment complex. I used to have a roommate, but they moved out a few months before this, and I decided it would be easier for me to just stay at the apartment rather than finding a new place. The other people living in the building were mostly older couples, but I'd never really met any of them. We all kept to ourselves, which I actually liked. Anyway, I was getting home from work late one night, entering the complex around 11 p.m. It was quiet as I walked up the stairs to my room, but when I rounded the corner into the hallway, a man was standing at my door. He immediately noticed me, and before I'd even had the chance to react, he started apologizing and saying he'd mixed up the doors. He then turned around and went into the apartment right across from mine. I'd never met him before or even seen him, but seeing that he lived in the unit across from me, I figured maybe he did actually mix up the doors, especially if he'd just moved in. It was still really weird, though. I didn't know why he would just be standing outside of the door if he did think it was his, or why, when he saw me, he suddenly knew that he was at the wrong door. Whatever the case, I went inside and locked the door behind me, not sure what to make of the scenario. It was so late, and I was really tired, so maybe I should have been more worried than I was. But I just didn't have the energy to think about it. I made a quick meal, then sat on the couch for a bit and watched some TV. About 30 or so minutes went by until I heard something outside my door. It was just a quiet shuffling sound, but it sounded almost like it was up against the door. I got up and went over, listening for a second before opening it. No one was there. I then stepped into the hallway and looked down, not seeing anyone, but heard footsteps going down the stairs. I went back in and closed the door. Maybe I was overthinking it now, but I started thinking that the man could have leaned against my door to listen into my apartment. It would explain the shuffling sound I heard and how I knew to leave as soon as I started walking up. Again, I could have just been imagining the worst-case scenario, but I was definitely more shaken for the rest of the night. I didn't get in bed until 1 a.m., but I fell asleep soon after. Nothing else that I know of happened that night or in the morning. I went to work and again got back to the apartment around 11. Walking in, I was a bit more cautious than the night before. I walked up the stairs and looked down the hallway, but no one was at the door. Still, for some reason, I got a strange feeling seeing the hallway empty, and I didn't know why. I quickly went inside and locked the door behind me, only to turn around and be face to face with the man from last night. He was standing in the doorway to my bedroom and immediately started telling me to be quiet and do as he says, trying to direct me into the living room. I took my chances, turning back around and trying to get the door open, but the man grabbed my arm and started to pull me back just when I got it open. I yelled as loud as I could as he tried covering my mouth, but being unsuccessful, he let me go. As I ran down the stairs, I heard him leaving as well. I went straight to my car, driving away and calling the police. When they got there, the man was gone. Of course, I told them that he lived in the room across from mine, but it turned out to be a vacant unit. The man, whoever he was, didn't even live in the building. I don't know how he got into the building, or into both mine and the vacant room, but clearly he had access that he shouldn't have. What he wanted to do by breaking into my apartment and waiting for me is something I hope to never find out firsthand. With him still being out there, though, all I can do is pray he wasn't targeting me in particular. This happened a few months ago. I'm 32 and live in a small house alone. It was one of my days off of work, so I was at home trying to relax and enjoy the day. It was about 4 p.m., and I had just started cooking dinner when a knock came from the front door. I put everything down and went up to the front. There was a man standing on my porch, and behind him was a small gray van parked on the curb. I opened the door. "How can I help you?" The man had a delayed reaction, but then said he was doing free home inspections in the neighborhood and wanted to offer me a free inspection for my house. The whole time he was speaking, though, it wasn't even like a typical salesperson. He said it all in a monotone voice and with just a blank expression. Even if he was normal, though, it seemed kind of sketchy, so I said I was okay and closed the door. I went back to the kitchen and continued cooking, but after a few minutes, I started getting a really weird feeling about that man that came to my door and what he was up to. I walked back up to the front to make sure he'd driven away, but when I looked out the peephole, the man was still on my porch. He looked spaced out, staring at the door and not moving. By now, I was sure there was something wrong with him. Maybe he was drunk or high or just not all mentally there. But what he was actually doing at my house, I still didn't know. Not wanting to take any risks, I went back to the kitchen and called the police to report the strange man staying outside my house. They said an officer would arrive in a few minutes, so I went back and kept watching the man. About a minute later, though, he walked off my porch and into his van, then drove away just before the officer made it. The timing of that was unfortunate, but at the end of the day, I was just happy he was gone. I gave a description to the officer just in case, then went back to trying to enjoy the rest of my night. At least a couple hours passed, with no more conflict. It was 8 or 9 p.m., and I was resting in my bed on my phone. But through the open window, I heard the rattling sound of an old vehicle pulling up and parking outside my house. Once I heard someone getting out, I quickly went out to the window. It was that same old van, but I didn't see the man anywhere. He must have rushed away as soon as he got out. Again, I quickly got my phone and called 911. But after reporting it, and just as I hung up, there was a loud thump downstairs. It felt like I could almost feel the walls shake a little, so I knew the man was likely trying to break in. I opened my bedroom door and went out into the hallway, then looked down the staircase and tried to listen. It was now eerily quiet. I walked down a few steps and looked around. All of the lights were off, but I saw the curtains by one of the windows slightly swaying in the wind. I looked closer, seeing the window had been forced open. My whole body tensed up as I tried to control myself, knowing the man was likely somewhere in my house right now. I carefully and quietly went back up the steps, then hid in the bedroom closet. I didn't hear anything until a few minutes later when 2 officers knocked on the front door. I ran down and let them in, but still we didn't hear anyone trying to run away or anything. It only took a few seconds for the officers to find the man hiding behind the kitchen counter. He gave up without a fight. Disturbingly, though, he was holding a large hammer, which he'd used to force open the window. Apparently, when they tested him at the station, he wasn't high or drunk, but he still had that eerily vacant personality. He never set his intentions, almost like he didn't even remember that anything had happened. It's hard for me not to think about the other ways this could have gone, though, if I'd gone to sleep and not heard him get in. I might have come to a horrible fate in the morning, or possibly not even been given the luxury of waking up. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. The power went out. I followed the muddy prints to the basement. What I saw wasn't human. I'm a 26-year-old female, and it was October of last year when this happened. The weather was getting colder, and we had a few days in a row of constant raining. I didn't mind, as I spent most of my time working from home. This day, I'd gotten up early and started work, but around 1 p.m., I was interrupted from my Zoom meeting by the power shutting off. I knew right away it was the power to the whole house, and not just my computer, because all the lights went out too. I quickly got my phone and held it up as a light source, then went over to the window to see if the neighbors were blacked out too. It was really dark outside because of the clouds and heavy rain, but all the houses nearby still had their lights on. Now I was a little worried that something was actually wrong with my house. I left the room and went downstairs, getting a better flashlight and then heading down into the unfinished basement. I maneuvered around in the dark through my stacked up storage boxes until I got to the electrical panel. The main power switch was in the off position. I'm not too experienced with these sort of things, but I did know that usually the switches would just be loose and not fully pushed the other way. I flicked it back to the on position, and everything immediately lit up and seemed to be working. I shut the electrical panel and went back upstairs to my office, then waited for the internet and everything to get running before I rejoined the Zoom call and got back to work. I was at my desk for the rest of the afternoon, working late to prepare a presentation for tomorrow. I didn't finally close my computer until 8 p.m. The storm was just as bad as before, but it was way darker outside, which made every flash of lightning beam through the windows. I got up from my desk and opened my office door, but as I left the room, I heard a few bumps from downstairs. I didn't think it was anything more than something blowing into the side of the house, but as I got to the bottom of the stairs, the power shut off again. It caught me by surprise, even scaring me a bit. I stood there for a moment and listened for something that might have caused it, but it was silent aside from the rain and thunder. Even the bumps that I'd been hearing just seconds ago had stopped. I went over and got the flashlight again, and made my way over to the basement door. I opened it and walked down to the bottom of the steps. The sound of the storm was way louder than I was expecting, echoing through the room in a way that it wasn't before. I shined the flashlight around and started walking through the boxes toward the electrical panel, but on the floor below, it was a puddle of water. I was shocked, but I don't think it really set in yet as to what that meant. I got closer and pointed the light around the floor, seeing more wet areas on the concrete before my light fell on a few stacked up boxes. Above it, the window well was open, and water was flowing down the wall into the basement. Now my heart was racing, and when I approached it, there were muddy shoe prints on top of the boxes, like it had been used as a stool to climb in and out of the window well. I frantically spun around, flashing my light all throughout the basement, terrified that someone was hiding behind the boxes and watching me. Then, in an instant, I sprinted to the stairs and ran up to the first floor. I grabbed my keys and locked myself in my car, then called the police. They arrived 10 minutes later, clearing out the house and not finding anyone. They did confirm, though, that someone had broken in, finding undone screws to the window well. They set it back into place to prevent any more flooding, but after I gave my statement, they basically just said to update them if I had any new information. There was nothing else. I'm left with no idea who broke in or what they were trying to do. Even more unsettling is the fact that when they shut off the power earlier in the day, they were probably in my basement only a few feet from me, hiding in the dark, while I had no idea. That could also mean that they were in my house for hours, and yet I still can't find any reasons for it. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, in 2019, I had taken a trip to northern Wisconsin and had been staying in an Airbnb. It was a cabin located in the woods right by the Canada-US border and was part of a park that had a bunch of similar cabins that I think were owned by the same person. I wasn't far out from town or anything, though. It was only 10 minutes from the nearest store. But the immediate area around the cabin was very secluded. Each place had their own trail leading just to their cabin. The first couple days of being there, I mostly stayed by myself, either inside or walking on the trails. After that, though, I got kind of bored and thought I'd hang out at the park center with some of the others that were staying in the cabins. The park center was basically just this area with some charcoal grills, fire pits, and benches. And every time I'd passed it, there were groups of people standing around and having a good time. So I decided to go check it out. I showed up around 5 and right away met a couple really cool guys. We shared some beers and sat by the fire pit, just sharing some casual campfire talk. It was just us for a while, but around sundown, another guy showed up. Of course, we offered him some drinks and let him join us by the fire, but I immediately felt something was off about this guy. He wasn't talking that much and didn't look like he was enjoying himself. I mean, this park was for people vacationing at the cabins, so it was just a little strange that he looked so tired and unhappy. It kind of killed the mood for the next couple hours, but I don't think any of us wanted to tell him to leave. Eventually, though, one of the guys left, and then the other, leaving just me and him. I stood up and put out the fire. then said I was going to head back for the night, but that it was nice meeting him. The guy stayed sitting, though, and just looked at me with a tired stare. I turned around and walked away, not saying anything else. While I started walking down the trail, I looked back a few times, catching the man still looking at me. He'd look away as soon as I saw him, acting like he wasn't watching me. Luckily, the trail to my cabin was well lit by some outdoor lamps, and from what I could see, I don't think he followed me. I made it back inside and took a quick shower, then sat in the living room for 15 minutes before going to bed. After the few beers from earlier, I passed out right away. I can't recall what time it was that I woke up because it was all kind of a blur at first, but I remember being confused and rolling over to look at the clock when I saw a man standing in the open doorway to the bedroom. I could only see his figure, as there was only the moonlight coming through the window. I was absolutely horrified and frozen, staring back at this man. But then he spoke, and I recognized his voice as the guy from the fire pit. "I need to stay here," he said in a broken and harsh voice. I didn't know what he meant, and I tried to ask, but only stuttered out a few syllables before he repeated himself. "I need to stay here." He spoke even more harsh this time, so I quickly replied, saying okay, but still had no clue what was going on, or what he even meant. At this point, I thought he was psycho or something, which also meant he was unpredictable. I slowly got up from my bed, careful not to make any sudden moves. Now, with my eyes adjusting and being face to face, I could see him more clearly. His tired look from earlier was accentuated, and sweat was dripping from his face. We looked each other in the eyes for a few moments. Then he stepped back into the hallway. He stood with his back against the wall, as if giving me space to leave, but I noticed his left hand was stiffly held to his side, like he was keeping something out of my sight. After a few more moments, I quickly walked past him, and as I got around the corner, I saw him still standing in the hallway, just watching me leave. Once I was outside, I ran down the trail, and by chance, a group was at the park center, having drinks by a fire pit. I got them to call 911 for me, and a few minutes later, they came and searched the cabin, finding the man standing in the hallway, still, and holding a knife in his left hand. When they got him down to the station, they questioned him, but his answers didn't make sense, and the man seemed really unstable, so it was all counted under insanity. I don't even know what else to really say about what happened, but I'm just thankful that in that moment, something told the man to let me go before anything else happened. I live in a duplex in a small community. I'd been there for over a year and hadn't found anything to really complain about. The neighbors that were sharing a wall with me had moved out only a month after I moved in, and nobody had bought or rented it since, so it didn't really feel like a duplex at all because the other side was just empty. Anyway, this was a pretty normal night. I had just gotten off of work at 10 and picked up some fast food before going home. I turned on the TV and ate my dinner on the couch. While I was eating, though, a quiet thud came from behind me. I turned around and looked at the wall that connected my duplex to the other, and the thud happened again. I muted the TV and went up to the window, looking out at the driveway. There were no cars or moving trucks outside, and it didn't look like the lights were on in the other duplex either. I went back to the wall and leaned my ear against it. The sound was very muffled, but I could hear soft footsteps walking around and doors opening and closing. It was like they were inspecting the place or looking for something. Again, that duplex unit had been empty for over a year, and I'd never seen anyone enter or leave it. And it being almost 11 p.m. only made it more unusual. After a few minutes, I knew there wasn't much else to really do, so I went back to the couch and continued watching TV. I stayed up for a while, probably 1 a.m., before getting in bed. As I tossed around and tried to fall asleep, I suddenly heard that same noise. I sat up, looking at the wall, but when the thud sounded again, it was a lot louder. I tiredly got up and walked over to the bedroom door, but before I opened it, I heard another sound. Soft footsteps, slowly walking across the floor downstairs. A chill instantly ran through my body. I stepped away from the door and quietly got my phone from the nightstand. I turned the volume down as low as possible and called the police, whispering my address to the operator. I tried to explain my situation, but as I did, a shadow appeared under the door. I immediately stopped talking and anxiously stared across at the door. While the person on the other side slowly walked around, they were very cautious with each step they took, almost not making any noise, but their shadow showed that they weren't going very far. They were just walking back and forth in the hallway. By now, I was sure that they knew I was in this room, but I still remained quiet and hoped that somehow police would come quick enough to help me. A grueling few minutes went by until a sudden loud footstep rang through the hallway, followed by another and another. For some reason, whoever was out there no longer cared to be quiet, moving through the hallway quickly and beginning to open doors to the other rooms. When he came back to my room, he twisted the handle and tried a few times to force it open, but moved on from it without too much of a fight. Then he went back downstairs and did the same before leaving the unit. Police came a while later, but I think the person that broke in had figured out that I'd likely contacted the police, and that's why they started rushing whatever it was they were trying to do. A few things had been stolen, but not enough to really justify breaking into a place, and from their behavior, they seemed to know that I was in the house. A few weeks later, though, I found a small camera hiding under one of the nightstands in the spare bedroom. I took it in to the police, but there was no way to trace it or see what kind of information was on it. Whether they were just trying to spy on me or had other intentions that we don't know, there's really no way for us to get an answer. It's been months since this happened, and there's been no signs of them coming back. But it's possible that I wouldn't even know if they did. At least not until it's too late. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. The phone kept ringing. No voice, until it whispered her name. That's when I realized I wasn't alone in the house. I became staying at my buddy's location for the weekend. She became away on a ride together along with her family. However, she had a small cat that became frightened of thunderstorms, and this weekend we had been alleged to get a definitely horrific storm. Her cat became very impartial though, normally simply sitting on my own in whichever room she felt like. It began out storming the day earlier than my buddy left, and it endured for the duration of the complete weekend. This was on Saturday. I had spent the night there with no issues at all. Her cat, Molly, did fine with the storm. That morning, I enjoyed relaxing on her comfy couch and reading. I always loved staying at my friend's place because it was out in the woods and felt so isolated and peaceful. Midway through the day, though, a call came in on the home phone. This was back when those were a common thing. I checked in case it was her trying to reach me, but it said unknown number. So I didn't answer, but a few minutes later, a call came through again. It said the same thing, unknown number. It rang out. However, this time, a voice got here through at the answering machine. It became a quiet male voice. They simply stated one word, my friend's name, as though asking if she may want to listen to him. He then hung up after a pair seconds of silence. I did not recognize if this become a person she become speak me to, or like a member of the family or something, so I simply texted her to allow her recognize that a person referred to as the house phone. I did discover it abnormal that it got here up as an unknown caller, though. Over the next 3 hours, 2 more calls came in from that same number, but no more voice messages. My friend never responded either. I guess they were pretty busy. I didn't worry myself about it, though. I figured it was nothing. I made food and really spent the rest of the day not doing much of anything. Later, say around 8 or 9, I found a movie to watch upstairs in the bedroom. I got about halfway through it before remembering to check on Molly and make sure she had food and water. I went downstairs but was confused to see her standing right at the front door, staring at the crack in the doorway, like she was waiting for it to open. I called her name, and she looked at me, but only for a moment before looking back at the door. It kind of creeped me out, if I'm being honest. I walked up to the door and hesitantly looked out the peephole at the porch. The glass had fogged up from all the rain, so everything was blurry, and I couldn't really make out anything. But then something moved, enough for me to tell there was something or someone standing on the other side of the porch. I felt a little unsettled, but I continued to watch, trying to get a clearer view of what I was seeing. I really wanted to know for sure if there was someone out there, but I also didn't want to open the door if there was someone there. 2 to 3 minutes went by without any changes in what I could see. I thought I was just scaring myself for no reason. After all, if someone was out there, they would have knocked on the door by now. I left the door to go check on Molly's food and water and grabbed myself some snacks for the movie. When I passed by the door again, Molly wasn't there anymore. I looked out just to double check, and something looked different. It was still fogged up and blurry, but one of the shapes I saw wasn't there anymore, like it just disappeared. Was there really someone standing there the whole time? Feeling off about everything, I picked Molly up and brought her to the bedroom with me. I turned the movie back on and sat on the bed. The whole time the movie was playing, I couldn't shake a really unsettling feeling I had. 30 minutes went by, while all at once Molly jumped away from bed and walked as much as the bedroom door. She didn't scratch at it or appearance again at me like she desired to head out. She simply stared on the crack within inside the doorway, precisely similar to she did on the front door, like a person became out there. My coronary heart straight away began out racing. I referred to as her call in a shaky voice. However, her awareness became locked at the door. I were given up from the mattress and quietly walked over, then leaned my ear in opposition to the door. I could not pay attention to anything. I then crouched down and peered under the crack between the floor. My whole body aggressively shot back. There was someone standing right outside the door, just a couple inches away. My eyes immediately looked at the doorknob. I had never even locked it. I snapped the lock down, and almost right away, the person on the other side ran away from the door. They went downstairs, where I could no longer hear anything. I called 911, then called my friend. By the time cops got there, the house was empty, and nobody was around. With all the information, it seemed that the intruder was likely a stalker, probably the same one who kept calling. So they tried to trace the phone number, but had no luck. It was pretty much left at that. I feel bad for my friend, because whoever that man was, he was definitely stalking her, and not me. I don't know if it was just a coincidence that they showed up during the weekend she was gone, or if they were trying to break into what they thought would be an empty home. After all, I in no way replied the phone, in order that they probably have been assured the residence became empty. Maybe they have been making plans to attend and seize her off, protect, while she ultimately were given again from vacation. We in no way determined out who they have been or what they have been doing. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, this became in mid-November of closing year. I had simply gotten laid off because of finances slicing on the office. Luckily, I had a few cash stored as much as cowl for me, even as I looked for a brand new activity. For numerous weeks, I became caught at home, simply searching through lists of activity openings on my laptop. After the primary weeks, though, I began out to get a chunk impatient. I implemented to quite plenty each function I became involved in, and I hadn't gotten an unmarried response. I ended up seeking to appearance on one-of-a-kind websites from the standard ones. One of them I had a chunk extra good fortune on, locating some new ones to use too. And later, with inside the day, I sooner or later were given an electronic mail from one in every of them. The manager introduced himself as Zach, and in the email, he said his schedule was pretty packed, but he wanted to get an interview with me that night, if possible. I wasn't fully prepared, nor did I feel comfortable enough to ask why it had to be tonight. But I definitely didn't want to let this slip by without trying. I thought showing up on short notice would be a good way to show my commitment. The job was just some regular sales job from the looks of it, but the pay was worth it. I agreed to the interview, and Zach sent me the address and said to be there at 7:30. I got ready and headed over, arriving 15 minutes early. I didn't have any time to research the place or anything, so I wasn't all too sure what to expect. The place it had me pull into was the parking lot of a small building. It wasn't obvious from the outside what the building was for. It only had an address number on it. I assumed it was just an office because it was a sales job, but it was hard to say because all the lights were off. The parking lot was also empty. Something felt wrong. I checked the address again and looked it up, and it came back to the same spot. The building had no name on Google either. I called the phone number attached to the email that Zach sent me. He didn't pick up. I called a couple more times and still got no answer. I waited until 15 minutes past the scheduled time, then decided to leave. Dark, empty building with nobody in the parking lot and getting no reply from the interviewer. The whole thing felt sketchy, and in hindsight, I should have been more aware to the possibility. I drove home. I was upset about the waste of time, but overall, I just wanted to move past it. I told myself I'd stick with the regular job search websites and would continue the search in the morning. I wasn't sure if Zach gave me the wrong address on accident or what really happened, but I didn't waste more of my time thinking about it. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the couch, cracking it open and turning on the TV. With no job, I had no bedtime, so I pretty much just chilled on the couch until I felt sleepy. Throughout the hours, though, I kept hearing something upstairs, just like a creak in the ceiling. I checked out the window a couple of times to see if it was. It was windy outside, but it wasn't at all. The creaking didn't concern me, really. It didn't sound abnormal by any means. I think I got tired around 10 p.m. I shut off the TV and the downstairs lights, then walked upstairs to the bedroom. The last thing I remember was getting in bed and laying down, falling asleep really quickly before suddenly I was awake again. My eyes were open to the pitch black room. As I laid there, I heard that same creak sound that I'd been hearing. It was close to me, like somewhere on the other side of the room. I looked over with my tired eyes, barely seeing anything in the dark. But then there was the slow and quiet sound that I recognized as the closet sliding open. My eyes opened a little more, seeing just the outline of the closet door slowly opening. I felt almost like I was frozen, just stuck in place, unable to move as I watched this happen. My mind wasn't fully convinced this was even real. It wasn't until the closet stopped moving and a figure leaned out from behind it that my body jerked out of the frozen state I was in. I grabbed my phone and jumped out of bed. Opposite to the side, the closet was on. The figure didn't move, though. They just stood still and stared at me, almost like they were hoping I somehow didn't see them. Standing up, though, and with my eyes adjusted, I was 100% sure what I was seeing was real. I ran out of the room and left my house as I spoke to a 911 operator. It was probably dumb of me, but I stood in my front yard and watched through my front door at the staircase. I didn't want whoever was in there to leave without getting caught. Obviously, they could have been dangerous and armed, so it wasn't the smartest decision. A few minutes later, 2 cops showed up. I never saw anyone come down the stairs, so I told them where I last saw the guy. They went in and found him still hiding in the closet. When they pulled him out and dragged him into the car, I couldn't believe how disturbing this guy looked. Oily, long and messy hair, disgusting clothes, and these wide, unfriendly eyes. He didn't say a single word as to what he was doing, but it only took a couple days to get the whole story. He had made these fake job listings on multiple sites. There were actually hundreds of fake listings he made, all for different types of jobs. Disturbingly, he had all my info from the resume I sent in, and he knew exactly when I'd leave my house for the interview, so he broke in while I was gone. That whole night, he was in my home with me and just a couple feet away while I was sleeping. However, we still never got an answer as to what he was planning to do without him outright saying it. There's no way for me to ever know what was going to happen that night. I live in the middle of nowhere. It's flat, barren farmland for miles in all directions. There's a main highway that's not too far from me, but that's about the only paved road around here. Everything else is dirt, or if you're lucky, gravel. Nearest town is 20 minutes away, and it isn't really much of a town anyway. I'm 44 and retired, so I spend most of my days at home. This was a regular, ordinary day for me. It was raining, which it had been for the last week, and I was inside going about my routine. Around noon, I decided to head out to my front porch to have a smoke and enjoy the falling rain. I don't know how long I sat out there for, probably an hour, when I noticed someone coming down the far dirt road that led up to my house. Again, it was flat land, so I could see pretty far, although the rain made it a bit more difficult. This person was on a bike, though, like an ATV motorcycle or dirt bike riding through the rain. I thought it was odd, but assumed they just mistook my driveway for being a dirt path. They kept coming down it, though, until they were getting really close to my house. They basically got right up to where my garage was before stopping. The man looked older, but was wearing a full-face helmet, and he was sitting on the driveway looking at my house until he noticed me. He watched me for a moment, then turned around and rode back the way he came. That was probably one of the strangest encounters I'd ever had on my property. Nobody ever comes down here because they shouldn't. I had to assume it was just a mistake. I stayed out for a while longer. Then the rain and wind started picking up, so I went back inside. I had almost entirely forgotten about the unforeseen visit earlier. I made another cup of coffee and relaxed inside. I was on a call with my brother for a while and took a nap as well. The day was chill, no errands to run or things to do around the house. The rain made a pretty sudden change around 8 p.m. though. There was thunder and lightning and heavy downpour that thumped relentlessly against the old roof. But somehow through it, I heard the slightest sound of a heavy engine outside. It had that same dirt bike sound that was identical to the one that came by earlier in the day. I went up to my front window, seeing a headlight carving its way through the fog and rain. In the moment, I didn't even think about how crazy it was to be out riding at night in this awful weather, because all I could think about was why had they come back? As they got closer, they shut off their headlight, and instantly they disappeared. I couldn't see them at all. I waited, but they never came up to the garage like they did last time. Minutes went by without me seeing or hearing anything. Where could they have gone? Unfortunately, situations like these can't easily be called into the police station, so I was on my own. I grabbed my shotgun from the bedroom, which I only kept for self-defense. I had no idea what was going on, if they were lost or needed help, or if they were dangerous. All I knew was that I was alone in the middle of nowhere and needed to be extra cautious. I spent the next 20 minutes routinely checking out the windows on all sides of my property. I saw nothing more until I made another rounds. And when I looked out the back window, I just made out something in the fog. It quickly moved away. The eerie nature of it sent chills through me. Being unable to see anything and having no real way to know what was going on made it as unnerving as it could possibly be. Then I started hearing muddy footsteps outside my house, like right up against the house, splashing in the mud and water. Every time I tried to get a look out the window, they'd move out of the way. I really didn't know what to do here. I felt if I let this go on for too long, things could get even more unpredictable and possibly messy. Clearly, their intentions were not harmless. I went into the garage and got in my truck, then quickly opened the garage door, pulled out, and closed it. My body was shaking the whole time, praying this didn't escalate. I moved the truck further out front and spun around to face the house. Finally, I turned on the high beams and the bar lights on the front. It immediately lit up my entire house, and standing right outside of one of the windows was a man. He was in full black clothing and holding a hammer in his right hand. It looked like he was trying to look into the window and maybe didn't even hear me pull out of the garage under the thunder and rain. The man sprinted off behind the house. I saw him get on his bike, which was laying in the grass far off from the house. He rode off into the dark. I stayed up that entire night. The next day, I went into town and notified the sheriff's office of the encounter. I don't know who that was, but seeing the hammer in his hand, it seems clear he was trying to break inside and probably had malicious intent. Luckily, I didn't have to find out the hard way. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. He got in the back seat, but I never saw where he came from. There was no road, no light. This was 4 years ago, but I still find myself thinking about it every now and again. It was storming pretty bad this night. I worked as an Uber driver, so on nights like these, it often gets really slow. Sometimes I don't even get a single pickup. Regardless, I always stayed out and waited, either driving around listening to music or sitting in an empty parking lot and watching YouTube on my phone. Even if I'd only get a few pickups, it's still worth the extra money that I wouldn't have made otherwise. This night was as expected. Nobody was out or going anywhere with a storm like this. For the first while, I stayed in a parking lot, sitting on my phone and listening to the storm run through the town. After an hour, I went and drove through to get some food, then went back to the parking lot and waited some more eventually. I got the notification that someone requested a pickup. I clicked on it, and it said they were 25 minutes from me, and they needed to be dropped off another 20 minutes away from where they were. Usually when this happens, it's because no other Uber drivers are working, so I'll be the closest available driver, even though I'm far away. I had nothing better to do this night, though. I accepted it and started heading over to them. They had placed the pinpoint location of where to pick them up at. The drive there felt like it took forever. Maybe it was the storm outside, or just the fact that nobody else was on the road. At certain points, I even almost forgot I was going to pick someone up, and it felt more like I was just driving aimlessly. It didn't help that the road it was taking me down was going out in the middle of nowhere. Like I'm not even sure I've ever been that far in that direction, because nothing was out there. Finally, after just about 35 minutes, I made it to the pinpointed location on the map. It was at the corner of two roads, but two roads in the middle of literally nothing. Empty fields of trees on either side of me, and more importantly, nobody was there. I confirmed on the app that I'd arrived at the location, then just sat in my car and looked around, wondering what the hell they were doing way out here with a storm overhead. After a minute of looking around, I looked down at my phone again and started texting them to see where they were. Just then, I saw someone in my side mirror coming up behind my car. They opened the door and got in. I had no idea where they even came from. I never saw them on the road or even out by all the trees. The man was absolutely drenched in rain, though, and had a disturbed, almost angry look. "You ordered the Uber?" I said, and he responded by stating my first name, which confirmed he was the right guy. I started driving. A few minutes went by, and something about him felt off. First of all, he was sitting in the middle of the back seats, so he was right in view of my mirror every time I looked back. And he also just had this really uneasy vibe, like he was up to something. I really wanted to ask what brought him out here, and why he was out in the pouring rain, in the middle of nowhere. But I also didn't want to cause any trouble. As we got further out into what only looked to be even more uninhabited areas, I thought it best to ask, and maybe get an answer that would make me feel better. "Hey, so what brings you out here anyway? I mean, with the storm and all," I said in as friendly a manner as possible. I looked at him in the mirror. His eyes darted away from mine. He looked like he was going to say something, though, but then he didn't. He completely ignored the conversation and looked really suspicious while doing so. That didn't make me feel good at all. Even worse, the guy seemed to get antsy now, looking around more and keeping an eye on me in the mirror, having to focus on the road with the rain pouring on the windshield. It was really unnerving not being able to see what he was up to behind me, but then he suddenly spoke. "Drop me off here." Confused, I started to ask if he was sure, but he cut me off, repeating himself. "Drop me off here." He demanded it. Something was clearly wrong, and I wanted no part of it. I did as he said, pulling over to the side of the road. He moved toward the door to leave, but I caught his eyes having to glance at my phone, which was sitting on the center console with the Uber app open. He put his hand on the door but hesitated. After a brief pause, he glanced back at my phone, then pulled his own phone out and checked it for something. Somehow, in that moment, I knew exactly what was going through his head. He'd been reminded that the app had his full name and everything. And so, whatever he was up to, and that I was clearly suspicious about, would be linked directly back to him. I knew it the second I saw his eyes look at my phone. The realization setting into him. "Don't worry, I'll cancel the ride from my end." "It won't charge you," I said, hoping to redirect his thoughts and in a way fake that I wasn't suspicious of anything. And that by canceling it, maybe he'd think his info would be deleted or something. He glared at me, his eyes still angry and dead, and after another few seconds of hesitation, he left out the door. He walked out into the storm and was hidden by the fog and rain within seconds. I drove away immediately before he could change his mind. Even though I had basically no evidence that this guy was up to anything, I still quickly reported his behavior to the police. You just never know. Several days went by with nothing until I got a really unfortunate call. Someone went missing that night, last seen near the forest that was just off the road I picked the man up from. They called for more information on what happened that night, but after giving them everything I could, they didn't find him or anything else. Unfortunately, with the storm, any tracks or evidence was likely washed away and gone by the time any searches could be made. They never found the missing person or the man I picked up. I was the last known person to encounter him. I think I'm really lucky that I didn't go missing that night as well. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, this was only a few months ago from the time I'm writing this. I work an overnight job at a warehouse, so I'm usually home, sleeping during the day, and I'm awake between 6 p.m. to about 9 or 10 a.m., even on my days off, because I like to keep my body on the same schedule. This night I was at work until 4 a.m. When I got off, I headed straight home, getting there at just about 4:15. All the roads were empty and quiet. However, when I got up to my house, there was a car parked right next to my driveway. I slowed down as I passed it and turned in, getting a better look at it. It was an old black sedan with heavily tinted windows. I couldn't see through any of them, and all its lights were off. I pulled into my garage and parked, taking one more look down the driveway before heading inside. The way this neighborhood was laid out, there was a decent amount of spacing between each home, so usually it was pretty easy to park right by whatever house you're visiting or whatever. So, parking right by my house seemed really unnecessary when there were so many open places to park along the road. Initially, I dismissed it as someone visiting my neighbors. Maybe they had a party or something and all the spots on the road closer to their house were taken beforehand. I checked one more time out the windows that morning, about an hour later, and the car was gone. The rest of that day went by as usual. I slept until 6, then got ready for another night at work. When I pulled out of the driveway to leave for work, the car wasn't there, so I really had no reason to think about it anymore. I went through my work night, which was a bit more tiring than usual, but I was looking forward to my night off tomorrow. The shift dragged on until I finally got out and drove home. Again, it was the middle of the night, and no cars were out at all. But when I got home, that same old car was there, parked in the same spot as last night. I did what I did before, slowly passing it and trying to see in the windows. But it looked no different than before. This time, after parking in the garage, I walked down to the end of the driveway just to get a closer look. As I was walking there, I thought I saw something move inside the car, behind the tinted window. It was just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, so I couldn't tell for sure. I guess it could have been just a reflection on the outside of the window, too. I walked up, maybe 10 feet from the car, as I wasn't comfortable approaching directly up to it, especially if someone was in there. Even then, I couldn't see anything else. Before leaving, I decided to snap a photo of their license plate, just in case this became a recurring problem. But I figured I'd never actually have to use it. Better safe than sorry, though. I went back inside. Just like last night, I checked again a while later, and the car was gone. Really strange, but it wasn't exactly harming me in any way, so I didn't think there was much else to do about it. I made dinner and watched TV for a couple hours, then got in bed and slept until 6 or 7 p.m. The sun was already set by the time I woke up. Having the night off, I did my usual long walk around the neighborhood. When I left the house, the car wasn't there. But when I got back from my hour-long walk, it suddenly was parked right there, in the same spot as the previous 2 nights. I mean, I just walked the entire neighborhood and maybe saw 1 or 2 other cars parked on the street. So why was this one always right in front of my house and only at night? I walked up to it and this time got right up by the window, putting my hand above my eyes and against the window to block out the reflection so that I could see inside. The car was empty, no people, and not really anything at all to give me hints as to why they were here. This was one of those off situations where it was really odd, but also they weren't harming me in any way at all. So it wasn't simple as to what to do about it. I went back inside the house. First thing I did was grab my phone, which I'd left charging on my nightstand while I was out walking. But when I picked it up, I saw an unusual notification. It was a motion detection alert from one of my security cameras. For reference, I had a camera on my front porch, but it only faced the door, so it never goes off unless someone was right outside the door. I also had 3 cameras inside my home, in all the main rooms. The notification didn't specify which camera detected motion, so I opened the app and checked. There was a 60-second clip saved by the app. I watched it, and for pretty much the whole time, the house was completely silent and there wasn't any movement. I was just starting to think this was a misinput by the system, but in the last 5 seconds of the video, something suddenly moved past the very bottom of the camera. It was really quick. They were only in the frame for a fraction of a second, and only part of their head and shoulders were caught. I felt my hands go numb while I held the phone. The room the footage was from was the bedroom I was currently standing in. Suddenly, the silence of the house was deafening. I could literally hear my heart beating as I slowly turned around and started darting my eyes all across the room. They could be anywhere, even watching me right now. All the thoughts rushing through my head only made me panic even more. Realizing I needed to leave, I hurried toward the doorway and out of the room. Instantly, I heard a movement from the bedroom right behind me. And by the time I got to the stairs, footsteps were rushing down the hallway. They were maybe only 15 feet behind me. I got to the front door and sprinted right into the woods. In the intensity of the moment, I never even turned around to see who it was chasing me. I was more focused on getting out of there alive. Eventually, it was only my footsteps crunching on the leaves, covered by the darkness of the woods. I called 911. When they arrived, the car was gone. But thankfully, I had the picture of their license plate from the day before. It only took 3 hours to find and arrest them. It was a guy in his mid-20s, and he looked completely deranged. Honestly, if I'd turned back and saw him chasing me through my house, I probably would have been so terrified that I would have tripped or something. The guy didn't seem to have any real reason for targeting me, but it was extremely evident that he was, in fact, targeting me. There were multiple pictures on his phone of my house, and even some looking through the windows at night at me sitting in my living room. He also had notes on when I left and got home from work every day for the last 2 weeks. Disturbingly, we still don't know how he got into my home and all around the cameras. And if he was able to get in unnoticed, there's no way to know if that was the first time he'd broken in. With how long and intently he was stalking me, he could have somehow had knowledge of where all the cameras were. And it could have been that this was just the first time he'd made the mistake of slightly walking in view of one of the cameras in my bedroom. Regardless, I shouldn't have to worry about him for a long time, though. This was on what I thought was going to be a normal weekday for me. However, it turned out to be far from that. Being early April, it was raining a lot around here. My job was partially indoor and partially outdoor, so it was always 10 times worse when it was raining and wore me out by the time my shift was over. I got off at 6 o'clock this day. I drove through the rain 30 minutes to my home, which was nestled away in the rural part of town. Strangely, as I pulled down my driveway, which was just mud at this point from all the rain, I noticed another set of tracks, like another car had recently driven down to my house. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was a mail truck or something, until I got home and noticed no mail or deliveries at my doorstep. Odd, but from the tracks, it looks like when they got to the house, they just did a 3-point turn and left. Probably just made the wrong turn. I went inside and got out of my soaked work uniform, then went to the kitchen to whip up something quick for dinner. It was maybe 7:30 when I thought I heard a knock somewhere by the front door. I say thought because it was only a single knock and it was kind of quiet. Plus, with the rain and all, it was hard to hear. I got up from the living room and walked to the other side of the house to check the front door. When I opened it, I was smacked in the face by rain and wind, and yet nobody was even on my porch. I looked around for a few seconds before shutting the door to save myself from getting drenched. It was probably nothing anyway. I went back to the living room, where I was watching a show while scrolling on my phone. Nothing really happened for a while, at least an hour, before I got up from the couch to use the bathroom. When I walked out of the room, though, I noticed something really weird. There was a mark on the floor. It looked like a little bit of dirt or mud, which really stood out because the tile floors were white. I knew I didn't wear my shoes through the house, especially not with them being muddy and wet from outside. Also, I was confused how I didn't notice it before. Where the spot was basically right behind my couch, which faced the other direction, because the TV was on the far wall. I grabbed a rag and wiped it up, but still felt really weird about it. It seemed like it was going to be just one of those things that happen sometimes where you never really understand it, but it's not exactly meaningful in any way, so you just forget about it and move on. Thing is, it did cross my mind that maybe it was someone else, but it felt more like me just scaring myself over nothing. I used the bathroom, then went back to the couch. I'd be lying if I said I just forgot about it, though. This felt different, like I had a bad gut feeling about it. I couldn't help but constantly check over my shoulder, sensing that I was being watched, like that feeling you get after watching a horror movie. With the couch set up the way it was, the whole bottom floor of the house was behind me, which kind of felt unsettling now. It got to the point where I was so uncomfortable that I had to turn the TV off and go upstairs to my bedroom. At least in there, I could be in my bed backed up against a wall without the feeling that something was behind me. I had a small TV in there as well, so I just continued with my night the same as I was. 20 or so minutes passed, and feeling more comfortable in my room, I was just starting to forget about everything, when I suddenly heard something from outside my bedroom door. I'm not sure what exactly it sounded like. It was just a muted thump, maybe a footstep, or something hitting the wall. I didn't know, but it was enough to make me instantly feel unsettled again. I got out of bed and walked up to the door. I put my ear against it and listened. I didn't hear anything. I stood in place for a moment while I gathered up the courage to open the door, telling myself I had to make sure nothing was going on. I opened the door and looked down the hallway. It was empty and quiet. I knew if I wanted any kind of a peaceful night, I'd have to check around the house as well. The only other room upstairs was the spare bedroom, which was a rarely used library/office space. I started to walk over when Out of nowhere, the TV downstairs turned on, and I could suddenly hear the show I'd been watching being played at full volume. My heart burned in my chest from the fear that just shot through me. I sprinted down the hallway and ran downstairs. The whole floor was dark except for the TV light, flickering and flashing on the walls. I turned the corner into the living room, unsure what to expect, but nobody was in there. I carefully and cautiously walked up to the TV, scanning the whole room as I did, and used the button on the back to turn it off. Was this somehow just the TV glitching, or was something actually going on? All the random things that had happened that night all just kind of added up. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and began clearing every area of the house. I should have called the cops right then and there, but honestly, in the moment, it didn't seem like it would be much of a help if someone was there, because they wouldn't make it for another 10 or 15 minutes. Anyway, I cleared the whole first floor, and through all of it, I never found even a single thing else off about the house. I then quietly walked back upstairs, but by this point, I was sure this was all just a string of unusual but meaningless events. I got up to the hallway and walked to the spare room, creaking open the door. I hadn't been in there for a while, but it all looked the same until I noticed something laying on the floor by the closet. It was the TV remote for the one downstairs. Blood rushed from my face. I backed up and ran downstairs and out of the house as I called the police. Sure enough, when they got there, they found a couple other signs that someone else was inside, including a broken lock on one of the downstairs windows. Likely, whoever it was had visited my house earlier in the day while I was at work, probably driving down my driveway and knocking on the door to see if I was home. After realizing I wasn't, they probably drove away only to come back and break in. They were inside the entire night, quietly lurking around the house. Maybe they really were watching me all night. It still makes me shiver just thinking about it. When I went up to my bedroom, they must have grabbed the TV remote. And obviously, they turned it on to distract me as I was walking up to the spare room they were hiding in, giving them enough time to slip out of the house. It's almost 100 times creepier that nothing was taken and no clear signs showed what they were there for. Hopefully, if anything else happens, I'll still be around to update you on it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. I thought it was a garbage bag in the middle of the street until it moved. Then it sat up and smiled. What happened next still haunts me to this day. This is the night I should have never left my house. I'm an only child and live with my mom and dad in a decently sized home. It's a little big for just the three of us, but my parents' running joke is that it was never their intention to have only one kid. They just never got around to having more. Anyway, I was 15 when this happened. It was a rainy Saturday night sometime in May. I can't remember exactly when this happened, but I do remember that it was during one of the last weekends before summer started up. There's one last thing I have to mention. I have a lot of weird medical conditions that make my life difficult. I get frequent panic attacks, faint easily, and struggle breathing at times. I'm also one of those weird people who needs complete and total silence to fall asleep. Like even a small fan is enough to keep me awake. I've mostly learned how to deal with it, but sleepovers and vacations are still unbearable. People always tell me they love the sound of rain and that it helps them fall asleep. But it does the exact opposite for me. It doesn't rain often where I'm from, but every now and then we get these insane downpours that keep me up all night. To be fair, it wasn't a full-on thunderstorm, but it was raining heavily enough to keep me up. No matter what I tried, I couldn't block out the sound of raindrops pattering against the roof. It was late, sometime well after midnight, when I faced the reality that I wasn't going to sleep anytime soon. So I got out of bed and thought about ways I could expend some energy. Eventually, I decided to go for a little walk in the rain. This wasn't the first time I had done that. Walking in the rain was actually something my parents encouraged me to do when I couldn't sleep. We live in a very safe residential area, and there's a huge public park that borders my house, so being out late isn't dangerous at all. Plus, the park is very well lit, which is another one of the reasons I've always felt so comfortable walking there late at night. I put on a rain jacket, quietly walked downstairs, and stepped outside without even bothering to bring an umbrella. I purposely didn't bring my phone because I knew myself well enough that a phone screen was only going to keep me up. It was oddly peaceful outside. I've always been one for nature, and seeing all the trees gently swaying in the wind, with the raindrops screaming down their branches, was exactly what I wanted. After about 20 minutes, I started to feel myself getting tired, which was a good thing. I turned around and started walking back towards my house, figuring I'd be able to fall asleep by the time I got back. As I was cutting through the park, I glanced toward the road and saw something strange. There was a long, black object lying flat in the middle of the street. At first, I thought it was an oddly shaped garbage bag or something like that. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized what it was. It was a person, just lying there in the middle of the street. They were face down too, from the looks of it. I felt a sick feeling bubbling up in my stomach. The only thought bouncing around my brain was the likely possibility that they had been hit by a car and were injured. Or worse, there was no other logical reason why someone would be lying motionlessly in the street, especially while it was raining. As much as my gut told me to just keep my head down and continue walking, I felt like I had to do something. My parents raised me a certain way. If I see a person in need, I have to help them. So against my instincts, I started approaching the person in the street. As I got closer, I was able to make out what they were wearing: black pants and a dark plaid shirt. Definitely not the type of attire someone would wear during heavy rain. Judging by the clothing, it was a man, but that's what I had already assumed. I'm not sure if it was the gravity of the situation or something else, but as I was walking toward the street, I realized for the first time that night how cold I was. Like the rain was lukewarm 1 second and ice cold the next, if that even makes any sense. As I was closing in on the road, a screech rang out from somewhere behind me. Instincts took over, and I whipped my head around, adrenaline flooding my veins. It sounded like a howl, but slightly off, like a wounded animal. That's the only way I can describe it. A quick scan of the tree line revealed nothing. The sound must have come from deeper in the park, meaning there was no imminent danger. Still, the sheer strangeness of it all had my heart racing. I had never heard anything like it before, and the lack of an explanation was what triggered that feeling of pure fear. But that feeling was about to get 1,000 times worse, because when I turned back around and faced the street, that person wasn't lying down anymore. They were sitting perfectly upright, staring at me. In that moment, everything started fading, and my vision narrowed. The only thing keeping me from passing out right there was the muffled sound of 1,000 raindrops pattering all around me. Before I could react, that person stood up and started sprinting towards me with a demonic smile on his face. And what's worse, he was holding what looked like a kitchen knife. Up until that moment, I didn't know what it meant to truly fear for your life. I snapped out of my haze and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. As soon as I started running, I heard him yell, "I'll kill you," at the top of his lungs. The wet grass made it impossible to run at full speed. But my one saving grace was that whoever was chasing me would have to deal with the same thing. I didn't want to lead him to my house, so I ran towards the trees, hoping I could lose him in the park. That's where the screech had just come from, I know. But I didn't have another choice. I didn't look back once. I just ran like my life depended on it. And considering how insanely cracked out that guy looked, I think my life actually did depend on it. I ran towards the densest part of the park, hoping I'd be able to hide in there before he caught up to me. I didn't even know if he was still chasing me, but I didn't care. Part of me felt like if I stopped running, the fear would catch up to me, and I'd pass out immediately. I made it into the woods, and right when I was about to throw up from exhaustion, I ducked behind a tree and tried to catch my breath. I looked behind me, and there was no one, or at least no one I could see. The only thought on my mind at that point was how in the world I was going to get home safely. I didn't feel comfortable moving, so I just waited there. I must have waited at least 20 minutes before finally stepping out from behind that tree. I took the long way home around the back side of the park and through this other section that spit me out a few streets away from my house. No one followed me. I finally made it home and collapsed on my bed, drenched and basically traumatized. I never got an answer for anything that happened that night. That howl is honestly what confuses me the most. I have a hard time believing it was somehow related to the man that tried to attack me, but it's just too coincidental. I think what happened is that guy heard the screech too, looked up, saw me, and then did whatever he did, for whatever reason. As for his motivation, I have no idea. There's just crazy people out there. Maybe he was on drugs or something. I know it's not a real explanation, but I can't think of a better one. I still live in the same house today, and even though several years have gone by, it's hard not to think about this experience every so often. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, I'm 29 years old, and one of the only things that's ever really helped me clear my head is camping. Not campgrounds or national parks where there's other people around. I'm talking true middle-of-nowhere camping. I grew up in Northern California, and I've spent the better part of my adult life learning to find those remote little pockets where you can still feel like the only person left on Earth. This story took place a few months ago. I had just broken up with my ex, and let's just say I was going through it. I needed to be alone. So one day, I just packed up my truck and headed out. I didn't have a specific plan. I just threw some gear together and decided to go back to a quiet riverside spot I'd stumbled across once before. It wasn't an official campsite or anything, just a little bend in the river you could reach if you followed this barely there dirt road past a whole lot of nothing. I got there sometime in the late afternoon, but the second I turned down the dirt path that led to the river, my stomach sank a little. There were already 2 trucks parked near the trailhead, one gray and one white. I couldn't see anyone around, but just knowing other people were out there kind of killed the vibe for me. I hadn't driven all this way out in the middle of nowhere to interact with people. I sat there for a second, debating whether I should just turn around and find another spot. But I told myself it was a big stretch of river, and chances were whoever owned those trucks were camped far enough away that I wouldn't even see them. I hiked maybe 15 minutes downriver, and I saw 2 guys fishing up ahead. They looked like the type you'd expect to see fishing. Thick beards, a little overweight, heavy boots, but it seemed like they were more focused on something else. As I got closer, one of them quickly covered something with his jacket and gave me this awkward half smile. As I passed, he called out, saying something about how they were just target shooting cans and didn't mean to freak me out. I just gave a polite nod and kept walking without saying anything. As I kept walking, I couldn't help but replay the guy's comment in my head. It wasn't even what he said that bothered me. It was how rushed and awkward it came out, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. I got that uneasy feeling you get when something doesn't quite add up, but I pushed it down. People out there weren't exactly known for their social skills. It wasn't that weird for rural folks to be a little off when it came to talking to strangers. I told myself to let it go and focus on finding a good spot to set up camp. I found a spot a little further down the bend, where the trees were thicker and the trail dipped out of sight. It wasn't perfect, but it was tucked away enough that I felt like I had my own space. I set up camp, pulled out a book, and tried to settle in. It started raining lightly not long after, so I threw on my rain jacket and kept at it, letting the sound of the river and the soft drizzle drown everything else out. Later, I wandered down to the rocks by the river's edge to reflect a little bit. That's when I noticed someone across the water. It was one of the guys from earlier, the one who had called out to me. Only this time, he was alone. He spotted me and waved. I hesitated, then waved back, figuring it was better to be friendly. He yelled across, asking for my name. I don't know why, but I shouted back my real name, Anisha, without really thinking about it. He stood there for a second after I answered, then pulled something out of his jacket. At first I thought it was a phone, but then I realized it looked more like a disposable camera. Before I could even process it, he held it up and took a picture of me from across the river. And then, without another word, he just turned and started walking back up the riverbank like nothing had happened. I was beyond creeped out. The weird speech patterns and mannerisms were one thing, but taking a picture of me, that was next level strange. I headed back to my campsite and just figured I'd stay put for the rest of the night. After the sun went down, I crawled into my tent and tried to get some sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying the breakup in my head, taking apart every word. every mistake, every what if. I don't know how long I lied there like that, just listening to the river and the light patter of rain against the tent. At some point, though, I started hearing something else. Faint, uneven sounds, like someone stepping carefully over wet ground. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the rain or some animal, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Footsteps circling the campsite, and the second I made that connection, my stomach dropped straight through the ground. I didn't even have to wonder who it might be. I'm no fool. I never go into the woods alone without protection, and this was no exception. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my handgun from where I kept it, tucked by my sleeping bag. Then I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the rain. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I needed to stay calm. I clicked my flashlight on and swept it across the trees, and there he was. That creep from earlier, standing a few yards away, half hiding behind a tree. He wasn't smiling or scowling. He just had this blank expression on his face, like he wasn't all there mentally. The scariest part wasn't his demeanor, though, but the fact that he was holding a small axe in his left hand. For a second, I couldn't move. All I could think about was how far I was from anyone, how nobody would even hear me scream if it came to that. But somehow, I managed to raise the gun and level it at him. I forced my voice to stay calm, even though every part of me was screaming as sternly as I could. I said, "Leave now, or I'll kill you." His facial expression didn't change at all. It was like my words meant nothing to him. After a few seconds of silence, he mumbled something about how his friend Ivan had discouraged him from coming to find me, and that he had to take care of Ivan. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I fired a shot straight into the trees above his head. He stumbled a bit, clearly not expecting me to do that. I leveled the gun at him again, a little more confident now. I told him it was his last chance and to drop the axe. He did, and a huge wave of relief washed over me. But I wasn't out of the woods yet. I told him to take his shoes off so that he'd have trouble following me, and then made sure he didn't have any other weapons on his person. Once I was sure he wasn't armed, I told him to go to my tent and grab my gear. I watched him like a hawk as he fumbled with my stuff, forcing him to toss it all out into the open where I could see it. I packed the essentials as fast as I could, never letting him out of my sight. I jammed the axe into my backpack and made sure I wasn't forgetting anything. I'd have to leave the tent behind, but that was a small price to pay for staying alive. I then grabbed his shoes and threw them as far as I could into the darkness, and I told him to walk in the opposite direction. I kept the light on him the whole time, and the moment he walked far enough out of sight, I turned and started hiking back up the river as fast as I could. That was the scariest part of the whole encounter, stumbling through the pitch-black forest in the rain with a potential murderer behind me. I wasn't sure if he was following me, but I didn't care. I just kept going, trying to use the flashlight as minimally as possible. Both pickup trucks were still in the pull-out when I finally made it back to my car. I didn't stop, though. I threw everything in and speed out of there. When I got cell service back, I called the police and reported the whole incident, describing my location as best as I could. A few months have passed since then, and I'm not sure if anything ever came of it, but I'm not going out of my way to find out. What still scares me most about the whole thing is that comment he made about his friend Ivan, that he, quote, "you in," quote, took care of him. I really don't want to think about what that means, but there's only so many explanations. I'm just glad I was armed. I could have easily lost my life that night if I hadn't been. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. The cameras caught nothing, but I saw him, crouched by the grave, scratching at the dirt. About 10 years ago, I worked at a cemetery. The money was good, and it was relatively easy. All I really had to do was drive around in my truck and make sure no kids were causing trouble. Every night was exactly the same, and by then, I had already gotten used to the creepy nature of the job. After a normal night of work, I got off around 6 a.m. and headed home. I didn't usually go to bed until around 11 or so. 30, I got a call from my boss. He asked me if I had seen anything last night, and I said no because I hadn't. He then told me that a grave had been defaced. I swore I didn't see anything though, especially not some group of kids, which are typically the culprit. Anyways, he asked me if I could come back and help him clean it, and I agreed, of course, because I kind of felt like it was my fault. When I got there, I realized I had underestimated how horrible these writings on the grave had been. This was not the usual small writing or anything. There was writing all over the stone, with horrible words and markings. What made it so much worse was that when we were cleaning everything off, I was finally able to read who the person was. I will obviously not say the name for privacy reasons, but it was a child, only 8 years old when he passed away, just a few months prior. I was filled with anger and sadness, unlike any I felt before. I mean, who does that to a kid? I stayed with my boss for a bit as we checked some surveillance footage. This cemetery was huge, though, and the only camera we had was on one building where the funerals were held, and it wasn't very big. And again, this was quite a long time ago, and cameras weren't what they are today. We didn't see anyone at all. My boss notified the town's office, as the cemetery is owned and run by the city, and for the next few weeks they had some new guys come out to go on watch with me from dusk to dawn. Those weeks went by without anything happening. Didn't see anyone or find any defaced graves. One of the guys rode around with me while the other one stayed near the entrance. I actually became good friends with my watch partner. We wondered and talked about what the defacer looked like. And after some time, it seemed like we'd never get to know. Nothing was really happening anymore. And it kind of seemed like a one-and-done type of screwed-up situation. Eventually, the other watch guards left due to the inactivity, and it was back to just me. Another week went by of nothing before something happened again. One night, as I had just started my shift and began patrolling, I drove all the way to the back of the cemetery, got out, and began my walk, which I had to start doing to see if any graves had writing or whatnot. As I was getting to about where the kid's grave was, I realized that something was off. I was a couple 100 feet away from the kid's grave, and it was pitch black, but something looked out of place. I stared in that direction for a whole 30 seconds, getting a little creeped out even. Then I started walking closer, shining my dim flashlight all around the area. Once I was just 100 feet away, I shined my flashlight again at the kid's grave. The light barely reached that far, and in the dim, foggy darkness, I could see a black figure laying on the ground, completely still next to the grave. Obviously, I was horrified. I didn't know if it was a dead body that had been dug up or a living person trying to hide. I stepped closer, slowly, and once I was maybe 40 or 50 feet away, I almost got a heart attack as the figure jumped up and sprinted into the dark field of graves, completely disappearing in the darkness. In just a few seconds, I stood in place, shocked, horrified, and confused. Once I got a hold of myself, I ran back to the truck and radioed for the police. Then, I went back over to the kid's grave. I warn you, what I saw was really disturbing. In front of the gravestone was a hole. It wasn't a big hole, nothing done from a shovel, but more like someone's hands. It didn't even go very deep, maybe just a foot. Either way, though, someone had tried to dig up this child's grave with their bare hands, and it made me sick. I'm not sure what the person was trying to achieve, and unfortunately, we never figured out who did it. But rest assured, it never happened again. The town hired 2 new people permanently, and one of us always kept watch over that grave specifically, while the other 2 scouted the area. The city also had more people on watch throughout the day as well. To this day, that's been by far the worst thing I've seen while doing graveyard work. No ghosts, no creatures, just horrible human beings. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, I'm a community patrol officer for a neighborhood in southern Las Vegas. If you aren't familiar with this occupation, it's nothing like a police officer or anything. I'm just a regular 25-year-old that drives a small patrol vehicle around nice neighborhoods to make the residents feel safer. It's a pretty common thing around here, since there's a lot of rich neighborhoods right next to a violent city. On my patrols, I have to also report specific community violations. For instance, some housing communities require bushes to be trimmed every week, so if I see an overgrown bush, I have to report it and leave a note at the residence. It's petty, and I personally find it weird that people like to live in neighborhoods like that, but it gives me a job, so I can't complain too much. Anyway, I primarily work 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. It's an odd shift, but that's just how they schedule for some reason. I'd never seen anything strange before this incident. The only things I'd ever really see were groups of teenagers doing dumb shit at the parks at 1 a.m. But last week, I had something happen that was beyond disturbing, and I can't stop thinking about it. I was doing my regular patrol, which was a specific route we had to take during the middle, beginning, and end of our shifts. This was my mid-shift patrol, so it was about 10 p.m. and pretty quiet outside. During the drive, I have to check the community pools to make sure they are locked for the night. I pulled into the small parking lot and walked over to the gate. I quickly walked inside and checked the pool area to make sure nobody was still inside, then went back out and locked it. As I made my way over to my car, I noticed a hooded man sitting on one of the park benches not far from where I was. Both of his hands were in his pockets, and he seemed to just be staring at the ground. Honestly, I thought this dude was just waiting for his drug dealer or something, but I didn't know, nor did I really care. I got back in my car and continued on with my route. The community is large, and the routes take probably an hour to complete with no traffic. By the time I finished, it was just about midnight. For the next little bit, all I had to do was drive around the neighborhoods. I mindlessly moved the car through the streets for a while before finding myself back by the pool, to which I noticed that the man was no longer sitting on the bench. I slowed the car a bit, looking around the sidewalks in the park, purely out of curiosity. But I didn't see him anywhere. Not thinking much of it, I kept on. As I drove past the dark, empty park, I couldn't help but get an uneasy sense going through me. I don't know what it was, but something felt off. I continued for a few more minutes before pulling up to a stop sign and noticed the man on the side as if he was going to walk across. After a few seconds, I recognized him as the same hooded man from earlier. He slowly made his way across, but stopped halfway and turned to face me. Being only a few feet away, he quickly walked up to my window, trying to ask me something. I cracked the window slightly, and the man quickly asked me where a specific address was. Of course, I said I didn't know. Sure, I could have looked it up or given him a general direction, but the circumstances of the situation felt very off. Even more oddly, he didn't even have any emotion or response when I said I didn't know. He just stood in silence for a second, then repeated his question exactly as he said it before. This was when I really started to get nervous and feel unsafe. I told him I needed to leave, quickly rolling up my window and beginning to move forward. The man didn't do anything as I drove off. Looking in my rearview mirror, he was just standing there in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. I parked down by a nearby street by one of the houses, then collected my thoughts. It was a really weird encounter, but was it reason enough to call the police? I didn't know. As bad as it sounds, calling the police while at work is a big deal, and I didn't want to unless it was actually necessary. The big question that kept coming up in my mind, though, was why was he looking for that address? I decided to type it into my GPS, and it was just a few minutes away inside the neighborhood I was patrolling. So I got back on the road and made my way over to the address. When I arrived, it seemed like every other ordinary house at 1 a.m. All the lights were off and nobody was outside. I parked on the other side of the street and waited for a bit, but not even 30 seconds later, the hooded man came into sight, walking down the sidewalk towards the house. I watched from my car as he walked up their driveway and up to their front door. He knocked a few times, then waited for a while before knocking again. Almost a whole minute went by before someone answered the door. Immediately, the hooded man slammed his body into the homeowner and fought his way inside the home. I was in shock, seeing something like this for the first time happening right in front of me. I controlled myself as soon as I could, though, and called the police. As I sat waiting in fear, I didn't see any movement for 2 or 3 minutes. I debated with myself whether or not to go in and try and help the homeowner. Honestly, though, I was terrified and didn't want to make an already horrible situation even worse, so I stayed in my car. Suddenly, the front door moved a little, then swung open abruptly, followed by the hooded man sprinting out and running off down the street. The police didn't arrive until almost 10 minutes later. I don't know what took so long. I'm sure it wasn't anyone's fault, but part of me was furious. By then, the man was long gone, and the homeowner was laying inside, having been beaten so hard that he was unconscious. Over the next few days, more unfortunate information came in. The homeowner didn't recognize the man from anywhere and barely even remembered the situation, but the guy also didn't steal anything from his house. This was very unusual because the man had clearly known of the homeowner's address, and his only known goal was to hurt the homeowner. Thus, it didn't make much sense for the suspect to not be someone he knew. The whole thing was very strange, and it still makes me feel uneasy. It's only been a week since this happened, though, so hopefully more information comes up and the hooded man gets caught. I had recently graduated when this occurred a few years ago and was taking full advantage of my summer vacation. I had started working full-time at the high school where I had just completed my studies, since I needed the money for college. My family had asked me to accompany them to my grandparents' home in Virginia, but I had declined because I had already purchased tickets for a concert that was set to take place on the very day we had to depart. I didn't mind staying behind at all. I mean, what 18-year-old doesn't want a house to themselves for a full week? Furthermore, I had no concerns that my neighbors would complain about the parties or cause me any kind of inconvenience, because most of them were gone as well. I had a strong desire for some fried chicken that day, which took me out of the house. On my way back, there was an accident on the main road, causing a whole line of traffic. So I had decided to take a shortcut and was relying solely on Google Maps to get me home. I noticed a light turn on as I passed the mechanic shop along the route. It was another car, but this car had only one functional headlight, which was really weird. I distinctly recall finding it really odd that this automobile had abruptly turned on its light as I was passing, and I was even more alarmed when it departed behind me. But I was aware that I have a tendency to be paranoid, and that I frequently wonder if someone is watching me and whether they have malicious intentions. I dismissed the idea as a weird coincidence and moved on. I started to stress out as I got closer to my neighborhood and realized that the car was still following me. My fear was increased by the fact that I was low on gas at the moment. I had two choices at this point. Either I turn around and drive home while the strange car pursues, or I just drive about and see if it follows or not. Driving around, however, seemed to be a very dangerous alternative, because I wasn't sure what I would do if my car ran out of fuel in the middle of the road, leaving me trapped with this creep. I reasoned that I'd better take a chance in a familiar setting rather than on the side of a lonely, dusky country road. Once this was decided, I pulled onto my street and felt my heart drop as the car with one headlight turned directly behind me. At this moment, I thought I was doomed. I started pulling into my driveway because there was nothing else I could do, and to my absolute horror, they started to follow me up. Now that I think about it, I believe I should have called the police, but at the time I was so engrossed in my own thoughts that the idea never even entered my head. I might have contacted my dad, who would have gotten his rifle if he was home, but he and the rest of the family were 12 hours away at the time. I stopped and placed my car in reverse when the car started to follow me up the driveway. They reversed in response, but they also came to a stop at the bottom, thus blocking my way out. I started moving forward again, but everything just kept repeating. I drove, they followed, I reversed, and they blocked my exit over and over again a couple of times. Finally, I hurriedly pulled further up the driveway and swung my car around to confront them. They had already covered more than half of my driveway by this point. I was afraid, alone, and furious. I opened the car door and stepped out with my small pocket knife firmly in my right hand and my headlights blazing directly into their face because I've always been naturally paranoid, as I've already mentioned. I used to keep a small knife between my seat and the car door. I shouted at them, holding the knife out. I merely hoped that they would be panicked. I think they might have believed I was a girl, or weak, or maybe had not expected me to react so aggressively. They backed out of my driveway, gradually and slowly made their way down the street. But then they parked their car by a neighbor's house down the road, and through the darkness, I could see someone get out. It was at this point that I began to think more clearly and quickly ran inside and called the police. I then went over to the front window, looking out of the dark neighborhood streets, but couldn't see any movement. My adrenaline was fading, and I began to panic even more than I was when I was standing in the driveway. Just then, footsteps were heard running around the outside of my house, followed by a nearby window, shaking as I tried to forcefully open it. I was terrified and losing my mind in the panic of the moment. The man continued to run around the house, testing every door and window, trying to force them open. I knew I kept everything locked, but I was worried he may still find a way to break in. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, then called 911 again to ask for an update. I was thankful to hear that they were in the neighborhood, less than a minute away. The man began banging against the front door, yelling for me to open it. 2 cop cars pulled into the driveway just in time, though, and surprisingly, the man didn't run or anything. I washed through the windows as they put him in cuffs. Then I made my way outside to greet the officers. The guy was trying to convince one of the cops that he wasn't doing anything wrong, but of course the cop wasn't buying it. Anyway, long story short, it turned out the man was heavily under the influence of both drugs and alcohol at the time. He never explained what his plans for following me or trying to break into my house were, but considering his state, it couldn't have been good. Luckily, I don't have to worry about seeing him for a long time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.